Annual miracle. In Finland, the land of 1,000 lakes, the sun barely dips below the horizon in June, casting the world in a perpetual, ethereal twilight known as the white nights. The air is clean and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the gentle lapping of water against rocky shores. It is a time of celebration, of midsummer festivals, where communities gather around massive bonfires, a tradition with roots deep in the pre-Christian past, a tribute to the sun, and a ward against the spirits believed to roam the dark, endless forests. It was against this backdrop of almost endless day, in the early summer of 1960, that 4 teenagers sought to enjoy the simple, innocent pleasures of a camping trip. Their destination was Lake Bodom, a serene 3-kilometer-long body of water in the city of Espoo, not far from the capital, Helsinki. The lake, a popular local spot for swimming and fishing, was a place where the modern world felt distant. But this landscape of breathtaking beauty held older, darker secrets, legends of spirits and entities that the 20th century had tried but failed to completely forget. To understand the events that would unfold, one must first understand the soil upon which they occurred. Finland is a land steeped in a mythology as deep and dark as its forests, a world where every rock, tree, and body of water was believed to be alive with spirit. Before the widespread adoption of Christianity, the ancient Finns and Karelians practiced a form of animistic shamanism, a religion of nature worship and powerful magic. They did not see an empty forest. They saw a realm teeming with invisible inhabitants. Every lake had its haltia, or spirit protector, and every grove its guardian. The forests were the hunting grounds of Hisi, a chaotic and often evil demon of the woods associated with frightening and dangerous places. Most terrifying of all was the underworld, the realm of Tuoni or Mana, a dark and dangerous reflection of the world of the living. It was ruled by the death god Tuoni and his bloodthirsty kin. This was not a metaphorical hell. It was a physical place one could, under dire circumstances, stumble into. For the entrance to Tuonela was sometimes said to be through a lake or a crack in the earth. This was the psychic landscape of Finland, a worldview where the barrier between the natural and the supernatural was thin and permeable. Even as the 20th century progressed, these old beliefs did not vanish. They retreated into the subconscious of the culture, waiting in the shadows of the modern mind. On Saturday, the 4th of June, 1960, 4 teenagers set up their tent on the shores of Lake Bodom. They were 2 couples, 18-year-olds Nils Gustafsson and Seppo Boisman, and their 15-year-old girlfriends Maila Irmeli Björklund and Anja Tuliki Maki. They were full of life, enjoying the freedom of a summer night. They had bought alcohol and provisions in a local shop and rode to the lake on their motorcycles, a symbol of post-war youth and liberation. They lit a small campfire, perhaps unconsciously echoing the great midsummer bonfires that would soon blaze across the country. They were just kids, camping by a lake, a scene of perfect Nordic ideal. As the pale light of the white night settled over the landscape, the lake was quiet. The only sounds were the gentle rustle of the wind in the pine trees and the soft murmur of their voices. They had no way of knowing that they were sleeping on the threshold of an ancient spiritual frontier, a place where the veil between worlds was said to be thin. They were surrounded by the beauty of the Finnish summer, but they were also surrounded by the invisible, watching eyes of the old gods and spirits of the forest. The stage was set, not just for a terrible human crime, but for a collision between the modern world and the primordial fears of the past. The idyllic scene at Lake Bodom was a fragile illusion, a moment of peace before a storm of violence that would shatter the nation's innocence. But was the perpetrator a man or something that stepped from the shadows of Finnish legend? The mystery is about to unfold, and the truth is more terrifying than any fiction. To follow the trail of the Lake Bodom killer, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment of the revelation. The transition from the ethereal twilight of a Finnish white night to the stark, brutal light of dawn on Sunday, the 5th of June, 1960, marked one of the most traumatic moments in modern Finnish history. Sometime between 4 and 6 in the morning, a period when the sun was already climbing back into the sky, an unimaginable horror visited the small tent on the shore of Lake Bodom. The killer, operating with savage efficiency, did not enter the tent. Instead, the assaults were delivered from the outside, through the canvas walls, a faceless, terrifying force stabbing and bludgeoning the sleeping teenagers inside. The murder weapons, a knife and an unidentified blunt object, perhaps a rock picked up from the very shore they had chosen for its piece, were wielded with overwhelming force. Inside that tent, a nightmare unfolded. Seppo Buisman and Anja Tuulikki-Maki were killed, victims of this brutal assault. But the worst of the violence was reserved for Maila Irmili Björklund. She was found undressed from the waist down, lying on top of the collapsed tent, and had suffered the most extensive injuries of all the victims. The attack on her was so vicious that she was stabbed numerous times after she had already died, a detail that pointed to a rage that was both personal and utterly inhuman. The crime scene was one of chaos and terror. The only survivor, Niels Gustafsson, then aged 18, was found outside the tent. He had severe injuries, broken facial bones, later determined to be a fractured jaw, and several stab wounds. His survival was nothing short of a miracle, or perhaps something else entirely. He would later tell investigators a fragmented, terrifying story of waking to see a glimpse of an attacker, a figure clothed in black with bright, shining red eyes coming for them. The discovery of the atrocity was made around 11 in the morning by a carpenter named Esko Ueva Johansson, who immediately alerted the police. By noon, the serene lakeside was transformed into a scene of frantic and tragically flawed investigative activity. The police, unprepared for a crime of such brutality, made catastrophic errors from the outset. They failed to cordon off the site properly, allowing a crowd of officers and other curious onlookers to trample freely over the ground, irrevocably disturbing potential evidence. This mistake was compounded when they called in soldiers to assist in a search of the surrounding area, further contaminating the scene. The killer, meanwhile, had vanished back into the landscape, but not before taking several puzzling items, including the keys to the victims' motorcycles, which were left behind at the scene. Some of the victims' clothing, including Gustafsson's shoes, were later found partially hidden roughly 500 meters from the tent. It was during this chaotic initial investigation that a potentially crucial witness account emerged. At approximately 6 o'clock that morning, a group of young boys who had been birdwatching some distance from the campsite reported seeing the tent collapse. More importantly, they claimed to have seen a blond man walking away from the site around that time. This sighting would become a cornerstone of the mystery, a ghostly figure disappearing into the morning mist. The stage was now set for a decades-long investigation, but the clues were already muddled by the trampling of the crime scene and the sheer, baffling nature of the violence. The police have a crime scene, a survivor, and a witness account. But the clues lead in contradictory directions. Was the killer a man, or was it a manifestation of the malevolent forest spirit, Hisi, or a servant of the death god Tuni? The investigation is about to begin, and it will plunge into a world of suspicion, rumor, and dark folklore. To follow the hunt for the entity that stalked Lake Bodom, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
With the discovery of the triple homicide, the Finnish police launched one of the largest and most publicized manhunts in the nation's history. The idyllic image of peaceful Finland had been shattered, and the public demanded answers. The investigation quickly focused on several mortal suspects, each with their own motives and shadows of suspicion, creating a complex web of possibilities that would fuel speculation for decades. The police, firmly rooted in the rational world of forensic science and motive, were initially unconcerned with spectral explanations. They were looking for a man with blood on his hands. The first and perhaps most compelling suspect in the eyes of the local community was Carl Valdemar Gillström, a kiosk keeper from the nearby Oita area. Gillström was known to be a hostile and disturbed man, infamous for his violent dislike of the campers who frequented his territory. Witnesses later recalled that he would cut down tents and throw rocks at teenagers who ventured too close to his property. In the aftermath of the murders, many locals were convinced that Gillström was the killer, and some even claimed to have seen him returning from the direction of the lake that morning, but were too afraid of the volatile man to report it to the police at the time. The suspicion was so strong that it reportedly drove him to his own tragic end. He drowned in Lake Bodom in 1969, an event widely believed to have been a suicide. A book published in 2006 would later delve deeply into the theory of his guilt, arguing that the police had overlooked significant evidence due to language barriers and other factors, but they found no hard evidence to formally link him to the crime. The second major suspect was a man who seemed to have stepped from the pages of a spy novel. Hans Assmann was a German-born, naturalized Finnish citizen who lived several kilometers from the lake. He became the focus of intense public suspicion, largely due to a series of popular books that promulgated a theory linking him not only to the Bodom murders, but to other unsolved killings. The case against Assmann was circumstantial, but chilling. Notably, on the morning of June 6, 1960, he had shown up at a hospital in Helsinki with bloody clothes. However, the police never seriously considered him a viable suspect, as he presented a seemingly solid alibi for the night of the murders, and was even said to have been in Germany at the time of another murder he was suspected of. Assmann eventually moved to Sweden, where he died in the late 1990s, but the rumors followed him to his grave, with some accounts even claiming he confessed to a murder on his deathbed. A third, less credible suspect emerged during the mid-1960s. A man named Pentti Soininen, while in prison, confessed to a fellow inmate that he was responsible for the Lake Bodom murders. However, this confession was met with immediate and justifiable skepticism. At the time of the murders, Soininen was only about 14 years old. The idea that a young boy could have single-handedly overpowered and murdered 3 older teenagers and severely injured a 4th, all within the confined space of a tent, seemed highly improbable to investigators and the public alike. For over 4 decades, these 3 suspects, the hostile local, the mysterious foreigner, and the confessing juvenile, formed the core of the public's understanding of the case. The police had pursued these mortal leads, but each path had led to a dead end. Gillström was dead, Assmann was protected by his alibi, and Soininen's story was dismissed. The case grew cold, a festering wound in the national psyche. Yet the absence of a satisfying rational conclusion created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed the old, dark stories. People began to reconsider the survivor's account of a figure with red eyes. They remembered the tales of Hisi, the demon of the woods, who was known to lead people astray and bring misfortune. They whispered about the underworld of Tuni and how its entrances were sometimes said to be through lakes. Lake Bodom itself was no longer just a scenic spot. It had become a modern-day gateway to Tuonela. And the killer was not a man, but a malevolent spirit, a haltia gone wrong, or a servant of the death god, claiming sacrifices in the ancient manner. The police were looking for a human monster, but the people were starting to believe they were dealing with something far older. The police have pursued every mortal lead, and each has dissolved into shadow. With no human killer found, the legend of Lake Bodom begins to grow, fed by ancient fears and a landscape steeped in dark mythology. But in a shocking twist, the investigation is about to turn full circle back to the one person who lived to tell the tale. The survivor is about to become the prime suspect. To witness the stunning arrest that would reopen a 40-year-old wound, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell.
For 44 years, the Lake Bodom murders remained Finland's most notorious cold case. The public's fascination never waned, sustained by true crime books, newspaper articles, and the persistent, eerie whispers of supernatural involvement. The only survivor, Nils Gustafsson, had lived with the trauma of that night, a permanent reminder of the tragedy. He was a victim, a young man who had lost his friends and nearly his own life. But in a dramatic and unexpected turn of events that stunned the nation, the case was violently reopened in late March of 2004. The Finnish National Bureau of Investigation made a stunning announcement. Based on new forensic analysis, the case was solved. The man they arrested and charged with the triple homicide was Nils Gustafsson himself. The prosecution's theory was a chilling narrative that sought to reclassify Gustafsson from a victim into a perpetrator. They proposed that on that night in 1960, a drunken argument had erupted inside the tent. Gustafsson, they alleged, had been excluded by the others, and in a fit of rage, he attacked Seppo Boisman. During the ensuing fight, Gustafsson received the blow that broke his jaw. This physical trauma, the prosecution argued, sent him into a homicidal frenzy, leading him to stab and bludgeon his 3 friends to death. The modern DNA analysis, which had not been available in the 1960s, was central to their case. It was revealed that the blood of all 3 murdered victims was found on Gustafsson's shoes, which the killer had hidden some 450 meters from the tent. For the prosecution, the absence of Gustafsson's own blood on those same shoes was a damning piece of evidence. They argued it proved his injuries had occurred at a different time from the attack on the others. The scenario they painted was one of cold calculation. After murdering his friends, Gustafsson had hidden the items to fake a robbery, then further injured himself to support his story of being an innocent victim, before returning to the tent to feign unconsciousness. The trial began on the 4th of August 2005, captivating the entire country. It was a spectacle, a live re-examination of a national trauma. The prosecution worked to bolster their case with witness testimony, alleging that 2 bird watchers had identified Gustafsson as the blond man seen leaving the scene, and that he had been overheard making an incriminating remark years later. However, Gustafsson's defense team mounted a powerful counter-argument. They insisted the murders were the work of 1 or more outsiders, pointing out that Gustafsson's injuries were so severe that it was medically improbable he could have then single-handedly overpowered and killed 3 people. They attacked the prosecution's timeline and the reliability of the decades-old witness memories. The defense argued that the presence of the victim's blood on his shoes was to be expected if he had been moving around the horrific scene after the attack, perhaps in a dazed and wounded state, trying to comprehend the carnage. The red-eyed figure he described was dismissed by the prosecution as a fabrication, but for many it remained a haunting, unexplained detail that didn't fit the new, official narrative. On the 7th of October 2005, the district court delivered its verdict. In a resounding rejection of the prosecution's case, Nils Gustafsson was acquitted of all charges. The court stated that the evidence was inconclusive, that no clear motive for such an extreme crime had been established, and that after so much time, certainty about the facts was now impossible. The state was forced to pay Gustafsson 44,900 euros for the mental suffering caused by his long remand time. The legal case was closed, but the mystery was now deeper and more divisive than ever. For those who believed in his guilt, the acquittal was a failure of justice. For those who believed in his innocence, it was a victory over a misguided prosecution. And for those who looked to the old myths, the verdict changed nothing. The entity that killed 3 teenagers and left a 4th for dead on the shore of Lake Bodom was never put on trial, because it was not a man. It was something that walked out of the forest and back into the legends, leaving behind the mystery that science and the law could not solve. The court has spoken, declaring the only survivor not guilty, but the truth of that night remains locked in the shadows. The legal system has exhausted its options, leaving the case officially unsolved. But what if the clues were misinterpreted, not by the police, but by our modern worldview? What if the answer lies not in forensic science, but in the ancient whispered stories of the Finnish people? The final chapter delves into the darkest and most terrifying theory of all. To understand the legend of Lake Bodom, you must confront the spirits of the forest. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the shocking conclusion.
With the acquittal of Niels Gustafsson, the official investigation into the Lake Bodom murders reached its end. The case was closed, forever filed under Unsolved. Yet for a nation and a world captivated by the mystery, the search for meaning continued. In the absence of a satisfying mortal explanation, the human mind naturally turns to more profound and often more frightening possibilities. The story of Lake Bodom had evolved from a true crime tragedy into a modern folktale, a dark legend with the lines between fact and myth blurred beyond recognition. To truly understand its enduring power, one must venture beyond the police reports and court transcripts and into the heart of Finnish mythological tradition, where the landscape itself is a character and the spirits are real. The survivor's description of the attacker, a figure in black with bright red eyes, is a detail that rational investigators would dismiss as a trauma-induced hallucination or a deliberate fabrication. But through the lens of Finnish folklore, this description takes on a terrifying new significance. The malevolent forest spirit, Hiisi, was not merely a metaphor, he was a concrete, feared entity. Hiisi was associated with specific frightening locations in the wilderness, sacred groves, ominous hills, and particularly dark and dangerous forests. He was a demon of the woods, a being of chaos and evil, often described in ways that could align with a shadowy, terrifying figure emerging from the trees. The red eyes could be seen not as a biological feature, but as a supernatural glow, the mark of a demonic presence from the old world, a sign that the attacker was not human. Furthermore, the sheer senseless brutality of the crime, particularly the post-mortem mutilation of Mila Irmeli Björklund, defied easy human motivation. It spoke of a rage that was alien, ritualistic, and inhuman. This aligns less with a crime of passion and more with the kind of sacrificial violence attributed to the servants of Tuoni, the god of death. The underworld of Tuonela was not a distant theological concept. It was a physical place whose entrances were believed to be located in the landscape, very often through lakes. Lake Bodom, therefore, was not just a random crime scene. In the old belief system, it could have been a known threshold, a Pyhä järvi, a holy lake in the most terrifying sense of the word, a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was thin. The killings then could be interpreted not as murders, but as an offering, a claiming of souls by the powers of Tuonela, enacted by one of its dark agents. This reframes the entire mystery. The strange theft of items, like the motorcycle keys, makes a different kind of sense in a mythological context. In many ancient traditions, spirits and fairies were known to take objects as payment or to create a bond with the human world. The killer did not take the valuable motorcycles, but the small personal keys, an act that feels less like robbery and more like the inscrutable symbolic gesture of a non-human intelligence.
The legend was further cemented in popular culture by the Finnish melodic death metal band Children of Bodom, who took their name directly from the lake, channeling its dark energy and tragic history into their music. They became modern-day scholars, singing not of heroes and gods, but of a contemporary tragedy that echoed the dark themes of their national mythology. The Lake Bodom case, therefore, exists in a unique space. It is a documented, factual crime with real victims and an extensive, if flawed, investigative record. Yet, it is also a ghost story. The failure of the rational scientific world to provide a definitive answer has allowed the older, mythical world to rush in and provide its own answer. The story endures not in despite its contradictions, but because of them. It is a Rorschach test for our beliefs. For the skeptic, it is a cold case with lost evidence. For the true crime enthusiast, it is a puzzle with a missing piece. But for those who feel the ancient pulse of the forest, who hear the whisper in the wind through the pines, Lake Bodom is a permanent reminder that there are places where the old powers still hold sway. The killer was never caught because the killer was never a man at all, but a fragment of a much older, darker story that began long before 1960 and continues to this day. The legend of Lake Bodom is now complete, a chilling fusion of documented history and ancient mythology. But the story does not truly end here. The lake remains, the forests still stand watch, and the old gods of Finland have not gone away. They simply wait in the shadows, reminding us that some mysteries are not meant to be solved by man. This has been a journey into the heart of one of the world's most enigmatic crimes. If you are drawn to the places where history and legend collide, if you seek stories that challenge the very fabric of reality, then your search for understanding continues with us. We are always exploring the deepest enigmas of the human experience. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. The next revelation is waiting just beneath the surface.
The passage of time has done little to erode the imposing presence of the mystery at Lake Bodom. If anything, the decades have only deepened its resonance, transforming it from a singular, horrific event into a permanent fixture of Finnish cultural identity. The lake itself remains, a placid, beautiful body of water that belies the darkness lurking in its history. The trees still whisper secrets to those who dare to listen, and the stones on the shore are silent witnesses to a truth that may never be fully known. The legacy of that summer night in 1960 is a complex tapestry woven from threads of grief, curiosity, artistic interpretation, and an enduring collective search for closure that transcends conventional investigation. For the families of Mela Irmeli Björklund, Anja Tulikimäki, and Seppo Antero Boisman, the case is an open wound that can never truly heal. The acquittal of Nils Gustafsson, while a legal conclusion, provided no answers, no motive, and no accountability for the lives brutally cut short. They are left with only the haunting, unanswerable question: why? This void of understanding is a heavy burden to carry through a lifetime. For Nils Gustafsson himself, the legacy is a paradoxical one. He is both a victim of a terrible attack and, in the eyes of some, a preeminent suspect, his name forever linked to the murders of his friends. The compensation money from the state was a small material acknowledgement of his ordeal, but it could never erase the psychological scars, the trauma of the attack itself, and the profound isolation of being the sole survivor of a nightmare that an entire nation has tried and failed to decipher. In the absence of judicial resolution, the story of Lake Bodom has been adopted and adapted by the broader culture, ensuring its survival for generations. The most famous example is the internationally renowned melodic death metal band Children of Bodom. By choosing their name from the lake's tragedy, they did more than just capitalize on a local legend. They mythologized it for a global audience. Their music, often exploring themes of death, sorrow, and the supernatural, became a vessel for the lake's dark energy. In songs like Lake Bodom, they gave voice to the unspeakable, translating the raw horror of the event into a powerful, cathartic art form. They became the modern equivalent of ancient bards, singing not of heroic battles, but of a different kind of national trauma, one that is intimate, unresolved, and deeply unsettling. Furthermore, the 2016 Finnish horror film Bodom is a direct fictionalization of the events, demonstrating how the story continues to be a fertile ground for creative exploration. Its core elements, youth, terror, and an unseen evil in the woods, proving to be universally compelling. Tourists and amateur sleuths still make pilgrimages to the lake, drawn by the macabre fascination of the unsolved. They stand on the shore, looking out at the calm water, trying to feel an echo of the past, to see a shadow in the trees. The site has become a secular place of pilgrimage for those devoted to true crime and the paranormal. Meanwhile, the official case files remain open, a testament to the Finnish police's formal commitment to justice. Yet, with all original suspects dead or legally exonerated, and with physical evidence compromised or exhausted, the chances of a conventional breakthrough grow slimmer with each passing year. The investigation now exists more as a symbol of hope than a practical endeavor, a promise that the victims have not been entirely forgotten by the system that failed to find their killer. Ultimately, the tragedy at Lake Bodom endures because it is more than a crime. It is a mirror. It reflects our deep-seated fear of the random and the inexplicable. It challenges our faith in rationality and order, presenting us with a puzzle that defies logical solution. It forces us to confront the possibility that true evil can be utterly senseless, or that it may wear a face far older and more terrifying than that of a human murderer. The story is a permanent scar on the Finnish landscape, a reminder that beneath the serene surface of everyday life there can lie a darkness that is both profoundly human and eerily ancient. The lake keeps its secret, the forest guards its truth, and the legend of the children of Bodom continues to echo, a somber, eternal refrain in the long, white night of the Nordic soul. The final word has been spoken, but the echo remains. The story of Lake Bodom is now part of history, a permanent enigma that continues to captivate and horrify in equal measure. We have journeyed together to the shore of that fateful lake and peered into the abyss of one of the most perplexing mysteries of our time. But the world is full of such shadows, each with a story waiting to be told. If you are drawn to the unsolved, to the places where history whispers and legends walk, then your quest for knowledge is far from over. We are dedicated to uncovering these tales, to bringing light to the darkest corners of our past. To join us on this endless journey of discovery, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Our next exploration into the unknown awaits.